Hello, my friends. Today we are going to talk about a book from Alejandro Macarrón Larrumbe, Demographic Suicide in the Western Hemisphere and Half of the World. Larrumbe publishes in 2018 a new version of his book, written for the first time in 2011 with updated estimations. The Demographic Suicide is a masterfully researched document that pursues to change the existing models of happiness and comfort, sought and embraced by civilized societies. Citizens of the industrialized world have reached a historical amount of wealth but are now menaced by a steep decline in fertility rates. Most of them register birth rates that are substantially below the natural rate of replacement, 2.1 children per woman. Larrumbe explains how this phenomenon represents a cataclysm that will cost those countries much more than even climate change and global warming. Their populations are aging rapidly, and young people refuse to have children. At that pace, no pension system will be sustainable and no economy will be able to prevail. His book is divided into four chapters. The first one, Towards a Demographic Suicide. The second one, Bitter Side Effects of the Low Birth Rate. The third, Why Do We Refuse to Have Children? And the fourth, What to Do Against the Demographic Suicide. In the first chapter, Larrumbe points out that in general, population growth worldwide has fallen in 60 years almost by 50%, going from 5 children per woman between 1950 and 1955 to 3.6 in 1980 to 1985 and 2.5 in 2010 to 2015. This rate has been distributed differently along the continents in the same intervals as follows: Africa 6.6, 6.5, and 4.7; Asia 5.8, 3.7, 2.2; Europe 2.7, 1.9, and 1.6; Latin America and the Caribbean 5.9, 3.9, and 2.2; North America 3.4, 1.8, and 1.9; and Oceania 3.8, 2.6, and 2.4. Larrumbe focuses his analysis in Europe, stating that migrants from the Middle East and Africa had been offsetting the so-called European demographic winter by all Western countries. For instance, whereas the birth rate of native French women scored 1.7 in 2016, migrants had been populating that country, and at that time 22% of the babies born in urban areas had foreign parents coming from Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Turkey, and Senegal, among others. That means that 25% of the next generation in France will have a migrant origin. Something similar has happened in the United States, where the rate of birth reached 3.71 in 1957 and dropped ever since to 1.76 in 2017. In 2015, the birth rate by races in North America was led by Hispanics with 2.12, whites 1.86, blacks 1.85, and Asians 1.64. Furthermore, two powerful economic countries are deeply affected by the demographic winter: Japan and Germany. Japan's birth rate collapsed from 2 children per woman in 1960 to 1.42 in 2014, whereas Germany did it from 2.37 to 1.47. Italy, Spain, South Korea, Taiwan, Greece, and Poland are also among the countries with the lowest rates of births. From 1950 to 2015, Europe lost half of its share in the world population. Larrumbe points out that the demographic winter has another important feature: longevity and the fall of mortality rate. This is a global phenomenon, but even more in the industrialized world. Life expectancy in Western countries has been soaring, and nowadays people reach the age of 60 or 70 in relatively good shape and live beyond 82 years old. According to the Eurostat, a European citizen can live in healthy conditions from 65 to 85% of his whole life. And on the other side, in comparison with 150 years ago, life expectancy has threefolded due to the substantial improvement in potable water, sewerage, sanitary facilities, and hygiene. This is such a historical accomplishment that more people dare to talk about the death of death, since the possibility of children born in this time surpassing the threshold of 100 years of living constantly increases. In chapter 2, Larumbe writes about the negative side effects of the population shrinking. With an increasing share of the aging population, consumption will start to fall. With less consumption, there will be fewer taxes, and less demand equals less income. At the same time, public expenditure on Medicare and Medicaid will soar, putting pressure on public deficits and debt. Real estate and infrastructure will collapse since there will be no more urgency for dwelling or highways. The price of houses and buildings will drop since not many people will look for a place to live. Therefore, the construction sector will experiment a gloomy future. The future value of real estate, for instance, is based on expected demand. Depopulation will depress expectation and stock exchange indexes will plummet. The credit market will also dwindle because veterans have less probability to live long enough to pay back their debts. And if no credit flows into the economy, fewer people will invest, and with no investment, there will be no economic growth. Larumbe divides the components of economic growth into productivity and labor force. In spite of the fact that technology contributes to increasing productivity, if the labor force stops growing, outcome will be weaker. Thinner generation of young people entering the productive life will discourage entrepreneurship. Larumbe argues that historically there is a relationship between innovation and entrepreneurship on the one side and youth on the other. Risk takers are more often found among young people because they tend to rebound quickly after failures. To back this statement, he takes the cases of Bill Gates, who founded Microsoft at the age of 20, Amancio Ortega, founder of Zara, with 27 years old, Warren Buffett, Buffett Associates Ltd., with 26 years old, just to name a few. Another big problem is the pension fund. The old system worked as long as more people were working than those in retirement. In 1935, when Social Security was implemented in the United States, there were 52 working people for every pensioner. Today, there are between 1.5 to 3 working people for every retiree. This proportion exists now in most Western countries and East Europe. Public expenditure in the pension fund will soar, and the baby boom generation turn into pensioners. This generation will demand simultaneously more Medicaid and more Medicare. Thus, several countries are increasing the age of retirement beyond the traditional threshold of 65 years old, like in Ireland, Germany, Holland, France, and Spain, to cite some. Facilities to harbor old people suffering from multiple maladies related to the aging are growing in those countries, many times keeping patients sedated and vegetating. Larrumbe finds a correlation between blooming empires and their abundant population as well as their collapse triggered, among other causes, because of less number of people. As an example, Larrumbe cites Germany and France. From 1900 to 1939, the German population surpassed the French one by one or more than 50%. That allowed Germany to militarily overrun the French and defeated them, had they not been helped by the British and the Americans during the two world wars. History indicates that a depopulated nation is usually taken by its neighbors. Today, Germany, China, and Russia, Japan, and the United States are struck by the demographic winter and probably will be displaced in the near future as superpowers by countries like India. Migration represents only a partial solution since it brings parallel problems that offset its benefits. Among the problems related to migration, at least in Western Europe and the United States, are those attributed to cultural differences and asymmetry in education levels. The first one has to do with terrorism of Muslim orientation as well as criminal acts perpetrated by foreigners, whereas the second is related to a formation of poverty belts in urban areas where foreigners and their kinships live in precarious conditions, detached from the wealth and opportunities existing in their host countries. Additionally, there are not few cases in which migrants make use of social protection systems, finding a way to live without working either by getting child aid or unemployment help. In chapter 3, Larumbe addresses the question of why people don't want to have children. Several factors are mentioned by the author, among others are fall of child mortality rate, less need to raise children in urban areas in comparison with rural conditions, less need to have children to take care of the parents when they retire due to the pension system, more women leaving home to work, dilemma between career and children, women's higher education level and its correlation with motherhood at later ages. Availability of contraceptive methods including abortion, high rates of divorce and separation, less religion and civic convictions, less need to leave home and create new families, and feminism and anti-patriarchal ways of thinking. The author comments every factor in detail. For instance, he states that it is not necessary to have so many children as it was at the beginning of the 20th century, because life expectancy has increased radically. In the late 19th century, 60% of people died before the age of 35. Today, among the countries with the longest life expectancy, only 1% die at that age. That's why the author makes it clear that All we need is to meet the natural replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman. If that goal is not met, countries suffering this malady are heading to a demographic suicide. Many of the above-mentioned causes are very difficult to remove or change, but neither there was or there has been a wide public policy to seriously address the problem of depopulation in respect to urbanization as unfriendly child habitat. Larrumbe takes the Mexican case as an example to illustrate the dichotomy of urban-rural families. In the year 20,000, in year of 2000, the number of children per woman in Mexico City was 1.9 in comparison with 3.6 in Chiapas, a more rural state. In 2013, the rates were 1.8 and 2.5 respectively. The pension system seems to be a powerful driving force of the population, proving to be counterproductive to society. In countries like Japan or Germany, where the state takes care of the elderly, the money to finance this protection system demands an increasing share in the public expenditure. On the other side, the lack of working people paying taxes diminishes and fiscal deficits grow, obliging the government to resort to public debt. This is a typical case of incurring to the law of unintended consequences. Another problem worth to be addressed is the refusal of young people to bear children at their early and most fertile ages and leave that decision to their late fertility stages. In many cases, it is already too late and too risky for those women to get pregnant. A woman with 40 has three times more probability of experiencing a miscarriage in comparison with a woman between 25 and 30. Furthermore, abortion has been used as a contraceptive method, and Europe ranks at the forefront of this practice. The author estimates that if the number of abortions had not occurred, the dramatic depopulation of the continent had been less intense. In Spain, 20% of pregnant women aborted in 2013. Latvia is the country within Europe with the highest rate of abortion, 36.15%, and suffer as well of depopulation with 1.65 children per woman. Finally, feminism had also contributed to the drop of the number of children per woman, fighting patriarchal ways of thinking as well as placing the male figure as the root of women's misfortunes, have discouraged marriages and children-bearing. In the same way, the struggle to rebut climate change and stop the destruction of the environment have fostered ideas that support the population under the argument we are too much or humans are the culprits of nature's destruction. In chapter 4, Larrumbe writes about the policies necessary to revert the demographic suicide. He uses a traffic light method to set different scenarios. Red, nothing is done. The problem completely ignored and the countries will wait until the aging generations put pressure on public expenditure to finance medical treatments and social protection, while the economy suffers from the lack of labor force, low taxes, and stagnation. Yellow, adaptation. The problem is acknowledged and thus saving campaigns are fostered to finance retirement. The government invests in the facilities to protect elderly people, hospitals, and medical staff. Research and investment in artificial intelligence and robotics are sponsored to substitute the labor force that is heading to retirement or is unable to work. The age of retirement is postponed. Active aging is that processing named, so that people can work longer and do not use the pension fund so soon. Take advantages of changes in real estate since aging population will destabilize this sector at most. And finally, to resort to selective migration to fill out positions for which there are no local candidates. Green. To solve the problem, Larumbe firmly states that the most efficient and correct solution is to have more children. To convince people of the advantages of motherhood and paternity, to turn demographic winter in a demographic spring, to assist and counsel pregnant women to prevent abortion, to set that goal of reaching 2.5 children per woman through the public policies. These policies should address five items: consciousness, knowledge, priority, money, and social values. That is, to be aware of the fatality related to the lack of children, to delve into the causes and side effects of this phenomenon, to set the problem as priority in the political agenda, to implement monetary incentives to raise children, and to rethink cultural values oriented to natality. That doesn't mean to see children as a source of income. Larumbe estimates that in terms of 2017 current euros, to raise a child along 16 to 25 years can cost between 300,000 to 600,000 euros. This amount should be paid back to the parents by the state in forms of social protection. The author closes this chapter by pointing out that human beings have had an unavoidable commitment through thousands of years of existence, a commitment shared by all forms of life, to prolong human life over the centuries through reproduction. At the end of his book, Larumbe dedicates an epilogue to the Kissinger Report. The Kissinger Report was a document that the government of the United States of America kept secret during the 70s. The goal was to set a strategy to stop the demographic explosion in the developing countries for fear that such a trend could eventually turn into a menace to the security of the United States. The population in those countries doubled in a period from 25 to 30 years, equivalent to 10 or 16 times in a century. This report was elaborated at the beginning of the 70s when the oil embargo, the Yom Kippur War, and the food crisis took place due to the climate calamities. This crisis depleted the world food reserves mainly in the United States. Had such a food crisis continued, the world would have suffered from starvation in ways only seen in the past. In the midst of the Cold War, a demographic explosion in poor countries would have led to food scarcity and social violence, as well as the emergence of government hostile to the United States interests. Thus, the cornerstone of the Kissinger's report aimed at substantial reduction of natality. To assure that goal, it was necessary to finance and implement the following policies in poor countries: to improve sanity and nutrition canals, to foster public education mainly among girls, delayed the age of marriage, to create more employment opportunities for women, to improve economic conditions for the poor since the higher income, the less number of children. The desire of large families diminishes as income rises. To ease the access to family planning methods, contraceptive pills, condoms, sterilization, and abortion. And the last one, to include sexual education in the school teaching programs to idealize small families. The results of the Kissinger report are controversial. Fertility was falling by the time this document was written, and worldwide, the number of children per woman has been diminishing ever since, but much more among the industrialized countries. Eventually, this policy turned against the interests of rich countries. If you like this video, please give me a like.